I'm going to ask the first question, but let's try to be real precise on this one. You all had a lot of accomplishments. What would you say are the one or two most important ones? How did you do it? And if you do something that you didn't like, how would you do things differently? Tom, you want to start out with that one?
There's a long list there.
Don't make it long, make it short.
When I first ran for mayor, I was thinking about running for mayor. An old friend on the north side, I was a legislator, said to me, you know, you're a nice guy, you're a good legislator. I don't know whether make a good mayor. You might be too nice of a guy. But I'll know whether you're good or not by how many dogs are barking at you when you walk down the street in 6 months. And I didn't understand what he meant by that. By that measure, I was a great mayor, okay? I had a lot of dogs bark at. You have a fundamental choice to make. And that is whether you want to be loved or whether you want to be effective when you're trying to change things. And that's part of the challenge of being mayor of a city, is that you have lots of decisions to make, and some of them are not obviously very popular. And you need to make those decisions. I would say, if I had to self-criticize myself, I was too impatient. We tended to move probably too quickly on some things and not listen enough. On the other hand, I think our urgency came from the sense of trying to change the trends I talked about in Pittsburgh that we did. I think the thing that I most love that we did was the riverfront trails. I'm a runner and a bike rider, and I'm reminded every day when I'm on those trails, I see people 80, 85 years old who wouldn't be riding a bike, maybe like
me, right, just like me, right.
They wouldn't be riding a bike. They hadn't ridden a bike in 60 or 70 years, and now they're on a bike again because they can ride in a safe, beautiful, flat place, and they don't have to worry about cars hitting them. It's changed people's lives in a remarkable kind of way, and in some ways changed the whole focus of the city from having turned our backs on our rivers for so many years to now have them as the front door again.
Thanks, Tom. I know this is sort of reductionist because we could go on forever as to what you do, but Rick, can you come up with what you think is one of your couple of most important accomplishments, and what might you have done differently at the conference?
I just got a note from Stanley for a hint. So,
but the first thing I want to say is I don't believe this is my accomplishment, okay? But I was part of it, and it's one of the 4 things I cited as examples, and that's what I always call it the regional asset district and local tax reform, because it was both. And Tom was a big part of this. He was in the legislature and an incoming mayor. But in quick sequence, when Bob was retiring, Bob Pease, my predecessor and good friend, and I was being talked to about coming to work at the conference, and I had the meeting with the incoming chairman, one Vin Sarney, who was chairman and CEO of PPG at the time. And one of the first things he said to me was, "This is crazy. I only pay a $10 occupation tax to the city of Pittsburgh, and I live in Mount Lebanon, and that's ridiculous because we use the city services and all that, and that's why my taxes are so high on PPG Place," he also said. And I was startled because I thought, here's a corporate leader that understands one of the basic imbalances that our city was suffering from for years and years, and there's a whole history to this, but suffice it to say that we are at that time, a regional city with a local tax base, and we didn't have the kinds of financial wherewithal. So that resulted in some tough decisions that the then mayor had to make in terms of withdrawing support from regional assets like the aviary, conservatory, zoo. And that started a conversation that the Allegheny Conference was invited by the then mayor to address in her budget address in 1991 to attack that problem. And so we bore down, we did a lot of research, we had a lot of community conversations, and what started out to be a 1/10% sales tax as an objective rose to a 1% sales tax. That's, just to give you a sense of the politics, that's a big step. And in fact, we were able to rally using corporate using foundation money, by the way, for the research, but corporate influence and getting the political leadership, Republican and Democrat, to support that additional tax, enable it. 0.5% goes to regional assets, and those have been a very important part of the quality of life. Frankly, the two stadia have huge financing from that, but so do the cultural districts, so do the neighborhoods. The $60 million fund was made possible. And the one other thing about that, on the other 0.5% went to relieving the city of what was a very onerous personal property tax at the time, 12 mills versus 4 mills in the rest of the county, and that was done away with, and property taxes were reduced. So I would suggest that's one of the most, and I think the other thing that was important, and I hope the mayor appreciates me saying this, it gave him a platform to have 3 wonderful terms, too. It was a key thing.
How about something you would do differently?
Who, me?
Yes.
Oh, good.
I'll
Call on Stanley. Come back to
about it. I'll go to Stanley. I'm coming back
there
to you.
There are too many of those.
I'll come back to you. Go, Stanley. Go ahead.
What would I do differently? Or
No. First, what are you most proud of? And secondly, what would you
I think I'm
done?
most proud of understanding that we're a capitalist society. That when you do work in neighborhoods, that neighborhoods have as much right to capitalization and good deals as anybody else. And that for a long time, I believe that we ought to talk to the mayor and we ought to talk to different entities in terms of the public sector dollars. And then one day it dawned on me in a lot of different ways, if you can put 10 or 20% down to buy a house, why can't we use public resources that way? And so when we begin thinking about neighborhood revitalization, we begin thinking about community strategy, it's not one or nothing. It's a leveraging model that we have to teach in the communities so that when we talk to financial institutions, we can talk from strength, and we can also say, we'll never ask you to do a bad deal. But financial institutions, private sector initiatives are our partners. They're not our enemies.
Good. Thank you. Rick, do you want to say anything what you might do differently? We don't have to push this. That's all right. I have another question, and let's go to that one first. Cities have common areas, and there's idiosyncratic needs. So best practices work sometimes, don't work in others. Given the Pittsburgh experience, what do you think is most applicable to be replicated in other cities from your experience? Is my question clear? How do we take what you've learned and see if it can be transferred to other places?
I think every city is struggling with how to invest in the future. So I think what we did is replicable in every place. It's sort of making a decision not to be the hamster on the wheel. Because you get on the wheel and you run in place and nothing's changing. So for cities like Pittsburgh, they need to be able to shift significant resources. And Rick talked about, in the middle of us in a depression, we make a decision to raise a tax that required the vote of 132 municipal officials, Democrats and Republican, of a sales tax. People said, I'm never buying anything in Allegheny County again because the tax is 7% here and 6% somewhere in the county over. So I'm going to save $3 when I go buy a refrigerator and drive 30 miles to do it. So think about that. We make a decision, usually controversial, to raise taxes to invest in our regional assets, in the libraries, in the parks, in the zoos, and that every city can do that. We're in a climate now politically where it's what I call the big lie theory of government, is that we can have great schools and wonderful parks and safe streets and nobody has to pay anything to get it. And we made a decision in a flat, broke, declining city that we were going to invest in our future, and we did it in all kinds of ways. And that's a fundamental choice that any community can make. If you're not willing to take the political heat and the leadership to do that, then you're going to stay where you are. So that's the most important lesson, I think, Mo.
So risk and investment, willingness to take risks,
right,
and the ability to invest
in the future.
Good.
Right.
Now,
Rick?
Well, let me just build on what Tom said too, and this might sound a little repetitive, but I think that the idea of taking risk, and each of the examples that I used actually in my introductory remarks were very big risks. They were, I mean, the Strategy 21 was by no means a slam dunk. It required enacting 3 different separate pieces of legislation. I happened to be the governor's chief of staff at the time, and it was lucky that we had a governor from Pittsburgh, by the way, who was very sympathetic, but we also needed Philadelphia votes. So at any rate, so I think the one point I guess I'd emphasize is you need to really put a lot of effort into what I'd call research and development, being a Carnegie Mellon prof, I guess I should say that, in order to I guess, mitigate as much as possible the risk. Do a lot of work at the front end to know exactly what outcome, or is approximately what outcome you want to produce. That's an important lesson.
Okay, so we have risk and investment and research and knowledge. Stanley, how would you add to that process?
Risk in people and changing their minds and changing their lives. When we had a decision to make, and most people think today it's standard to have mixed income neighborhoods, but when we were talking about it 10, 15 years ago, and the mayor says to me, I don't care if you have $30 million to rehab Aliquippa Terrace, we're not going to do it. We're going to revitalize this neighborhood and turn it into a mixed income community. And when we met with the residents, the largest public housing community between New York and Chicago, and we're sitting there talking with the residents, and we're trying to get the poor to understand that they've been mistreated, that somehow we've lied to them, we've isolated them, we've put them in a trick bag, and we've now got to pay the piper. And when we told them up front, we're not going to put in new bathrooms and new kitchens, we're going to start over. We're going to rebuild this neighborhood. They didn't think we were telling the truth because they've been lied to. And so when you tell people you're going to do something and rebuild the neighborhood, that's a risky piece. When we had that conversation, Tom had 3 different mothers. My mother had 15 different names. Chairs flew across the room. And no one believed what we were saying. But today you go there, as I've gone back and had people come up to me and hug and kiss me and say 2 words: you kept your promise.
Can I jump in?
Sure, absolutely jump in.
Stanley's an example. When he's talked about empowering people, it is also putting people in a position that they can shine. Stanley is an example of somebody who had never run a public housing authority, never managed more than 4 or 5 people. And when we put him in as director of the public housing authority, he made a huge difference. Steve Leeper, some of you know, in Cincinnati, was our development director here. Chris Shea in East Allegheny, or in East Baltimore now, running where the wire was made and transforming that neighborhood. We're all people that were empowered in Pittsburgh. And I think bringing that understanding, you get bright, generally young, brash people who are willing to kick the doors down, and give them the ability and the opportunity and the ability to take that risk is a key to changing your city's trend.
So finding your talent, giving that talent an opportunity, right. And it can be in places that you wouldn't expect. And the other thing that I think Stanley said that's important is there's mistrust in the community. You have to take risk, and if you show that you can carry out your commitment, you can change attitudes, right? We have about 5 more minutes. I've got a number of questions here. I'm going to add this question together. We've talked about the past, we've talked about some issues. What is the future like is one of the questions. And so let me add to that. We have a new mayor coming into the city of Pittsburgh. If you would give him advice as to 1 or 2 things that you've learned from the past that would be most helpful for his administration in the future, what would that be?
You're asking me?
Of course I'm asking
you. Be willing to take risk. And I think with what Rick said, understand that partnerships in Pittsburgh are something that we sort of take for granted, don't exist in a lot of other places in the same form. They need to be nurtured. not taken for granted. I think of attracting really smart people to carry out your plans. I think what would be different for the new mayor than I faced, and Rick talked about this, Pittsburgh was such a basket case at the time. We were very focused on Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh is doing relatively well, better than the region, a lot of places in the region, and I think we need in this area to have a bigger conversation about how the whole region moves forward. And I think the other final piece of it is there's parts of Pittsburgh that are not enjoying the same kind of benefits that a lot of other people are in the African American community, particularly. And I think there needs to be a real focus on how that community moves into and shares the benefits of what's going on in Pittsburgh today.
Well, let me follow that up with Stanley, the idea of equity for the new mayor.
I just got to follow what Tom said. The whole issue of diversity is real. You know, I've often said, and I've not said this publicly before, but I've often thought about, what if I were white? Would I look at myself differently? African Americans, people in diverse communities have to walk different lines at different times, and every day look at partnerships. In the African American community today, particularly in Pittsburgh and a lot of other cities, the question is about jobs, and more jobs. The equity of how can we live just as well as anyone else. And jobs just don't spring up. We got that. But research and development in terms of various neighborhoods, in terms of opportunities, in terms of what wealth these neighborhoods offer is key. Listen intently. It's easy to get in office and figure out you're the mayor now and you can do this or you can do that. But you got to spend a lot of time listening to the right people, spending time in the neighborhoods and seeking the community's advice, and then paying attention and putting your programs together based upon what the needs of the residents are.
Very good. Rick, final comments.
I'm going to sound a little political when I say this, and since Tom and I have, the experience of Harrisburg, maybe it's an appropriate thing to emphasize. But look, I said this earlier. Our city, every municipality adjacent to our city, our county, they all operate under the ground rules set in our state capital. And they're inevitably, and our mayor was, our mayor on the rostrum was very successful at times and other times frustrated, and he'll be the first to say that. So inevitably, to do what we want to do in our future, we're going to have to go to Harrisburg at one point or another, whether it's education, whether it's transportation, you name it. So I would say to the new mayor, recognize the role that state government plays in setting ground rules and boundaries around you, because there are times you're going to want to step over those boundaries. And so how do you do that? You get the votes. You have to get the votes. So you have to have that relationship with the legislature, with the rest of the state, find common interest with Philadelphia, with Scranton, with York, with Harrisburg, these other places and other communities in our state in order to find common interest. Very, very important, I think, for the future.
Thank you. Let's thank the panel. I think they did an exceptional job. Just a couple final words, if I can. I think it's hard to sum up this rich activity, but it seems to me that one of the things that's clear, as city grows because it coordinates and works with a whole bunch of factors, state government, business and communities, neighborhoods, it thinks about issues of equity and risk-taking and leadership and talent. And this panel shows how lucky Pittsburgh was to have those forces at work. Thank you again. And let me just say one last thing. We have in the audience a person who epitomizes the Pittsburgh story from its beginning, who started with the Urban Redevelopment Authority when it began, was the head of the Allegheny Conference, and as anybody in this town that has done more for the growth of Pittsburgh than Bob Pease, and I'd like to give him a hand of applause. Thank you very much.
You can stay. You can stay. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin, and thanks to the panelists.